I'm Billy, I'm an alcoholic. So welcome back. So I thought maybe, how many Facebook users do we have in the room? I'm just curious. A lot. So how would you like if we just talked about social media and anonymity for a little bit before we go anywhere else? Okay. So, social media is not going anywhere. We know that. We also know that it's not inherently negative. Like, sure, there's some sponsees who I run into where clearly one of their other problems is anything they do with digitally. Like the internet's one big people, place, and thing for them. Like, it goes away. But the power of communication is clear. So there's both the way we use social media to reach newcomers, and there's social media amongst those of us that are members who interact on Facebook or wherever else. And anonymity. And there's, of course, two types of anonymity in AA, although sometimes we only talk about one. 11th tradition anonymity, which is pretty much press, radio, and film, and public media, and internet. But then there's 12th tradition, which we don't talk about a lot, which is the humility side of anonymity. Now, the one thing we can safely say is that real alcoholics are not wired to be famous for being sober.
Sorry, repeat that?
What?
I couldn't hear that. The chair moved.
Real alcoholics are not wired to be famous for being sober. The statistics are devastating as far as, can people who are as spiritually broken as us be famous for being sober? Some people think that's the only way to break the stigma, is for all of us to tell the rest of the world that we're recovered alcoholics. I am not one of those people. I believe that the alcoholic ego is my enemy, and that the last thing I need to be famous for is being sober. But Facebook has some interesting implications, and I'm only going to talk about our group conscience as it is today, that you can find in the PI workbook or Understanding Anonymity. And there was an interesting conversation we had before, and with a whiteboard there I can draw a quick example, which I think is good for everybody. Is there anyone here who doesn't know the difference between a public group, a closed group, and a secret group on Facebook? Does everyone know the differences? No. Oh, that's good.
Seriously, don't use Facebook.
Okay. Whether you do or don't, that's personal choice. But the fact of the matter is, we have a lot of members on Facebook. A public group, a closed group, and a secret group. In a public group, everyone sees the members of that group and can see the comments. It's very simple. In a closed group, only members see the comments. However, everyone can see who's a member. Closed groups, I'm going to put a big line there. According to our current literature, there's no anonymity protection in public or closed groups. It doesn't matter if your comments can't be seen. If I can go in Facebook and see that you're a member of the Friends of Bill or a member of whatever. Secret groups, nothing. Nobody can see that you're a member. Nobody can see your comments unless they're in the group. There is a great secret Facebook group called SES. I think it's one of the best out there. Southeast Servants. They talk about service stuff. They talk about general service. They talk about all kinds of questions. But as far as groups go, secret groups meet our anonymity definitions. Any questions about that? We could argue about, well, is it really AA? Who can use the AA name? Blah, blah, blah. But we all know any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together anywhere can call themselves an AA group. But it's not an AA group. It's just a Facebook group of AA members. Now, in the best secret groups, like Southeast Servants, if I suggested that you become a member, that administrator will ask you, are you a member of Alcoholics Anonymous? So that anonymity is protected inside that secret group. But the real problem we have is the blurry line. The blurry line is where we have most of our problems. So I'm guessing most of the Facebook users are familiar with the term wall, your wall, where people can write on your wall, where you can broadcast comments out to everybody. So obviously if I wrote on my wall that I'm a member of the early morning AA literature group, that's not within our traditions. Now, if you were to look at my Facebook page, I really don't post there. Almost never now. I travel a lot for work, and I love to run into people that I know. So maybe a couple of years ago, I might have wrote, in LA for 2 days. So, a lot of things we have to worry about with anonymity are the aggregate, not the individual comment. Because I could write in LA for work. My statement has nothing to do with AA. Except I wrote that before I took off from Atlanta, and then I land in LA and I turn on my phone and there's like 6 comments. Comment number 1, what meeting you going to? Now that's not inherently a tradition violation because it doesn't say A. However, people I work with might be like, well, what kind of meetings are you talking about? Or is it a work meeting? Somebody might write, I'm going to the Pacific group. And they say, will you be there? So it's the aggregate of comments that cause trouble in social media for sure. Now, we have code words. Another problem in Alcoholics Anonymous. Code words. So these are words that inherently might not break your anonymity, but they blur the line. Right? What's the biggest code word we see out there today? The good old Roman numeral.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not going to write that I'm celebrating my AA anniversary. I'm just going to put up a Roman numeral 5.
Right.
Or I'm going to put up a 10. That somehow, because I'm now using Roman numerals, that it is not a tradition violation. Now, technically, on its whole, is that a traditions violation? Well, let's talk about what AA really owns spiritually. If I say I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in a press radio film, I have broken the tradition. That is not even a question. If I use my last name or my full face, I've clearly crossed the line. Our own literature says, though, however, we do not own the word alcoholic. I could appear on a news show or something and say, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I have not violated my 11th tradition anonymity. However, I personally do not think that fits in with the 12th tradition. Not if I'm doing it for my own benefit. I happen to work as an executive for a big company. There are a couple of treatment centers now that specialize in treating executives. every once in a while I get invited to speak at some big gathering. Like, I won't go. I don't want to be famous for being an alcoholic. There are plenty of places I go, and I think this is the thing that people don't see sometimes, is there's ways to spread our message without it depending on our own anonymity. Everybody I work with knows I don't drink. It's not a secret I don't drink. Only a very few people actually get to know why I don't drink. But I think that's a question between a sponsor and a sponsee. Because I think we don't even put that in our sponsees' heads enough. Who do you tell you're an Alcoholics Anonymous? Because anyone who tells you it'll never be used against you is lying. Just telling you that right now. We can talk about the world and the stigmas removed. We can say whatever we want. I'm telling you, there are people who will hold it against you. Even to the point of time doesn't matter, that crazy statement. I can tell you that 3 years ago when I moved to Atlanta, I needed to become a licensed professional for my profession in the state of Georgia. It was a story of my whole life. I passed the test, and then I got a letter that there were irregularities with my fingerprints, and that my case was assigned to a lawyer in the state agency to investigate me. And when I went and met with that lawyer, they had a nice little report. It told them where I was, what somebody else alleges that I did, what I finally admitted that I did, and the disposition of my case. For a blackout drinker, this report is beautiful. Because it makes clear a lot of things. But that woman whose job was to make sure that I was okay, to her, time did matter. To her, what mattered was the last thing on that report was many years ago. She did not want to hear that I got up the earliest of the people who go to a meeting with me, and therefore I'm sober the longest today. She was not part of that club. And I think that's where we've gone a little off the rails as far as we work the program a day at a time, but we have a program for permanent sobriety. But anonymity is a tricky subject in the outside world today, especially with the advent of computers and everything else. And anything that goes up digitally is there forever. I now am involved with recruiting kids that are in their last 2 years of college. And, last year I went and spoke to the 40 new kids who are college graduates who came to work for us. And, they're very different than me. They don't have a huge gap in their resume, right? They're all 22 years old and, all together and buttoned up. And I can't even, fathom that for me. But I also can't fathom that, I can't even imagine if my drinking was documented on social media. It's earth-shattering to me to kind of think what that would have looked like. It's bad enough when you run into an old friend who happens to have one picture from a disposable camera, right? And you're like, holy shit, I didn't even know someone took pictures. But we have to believe that, what we do, that is, everyone is going to see it. And that your anonymity should be personal to yourself. But we also know that it's not like social media is evil. There are many people we know who have seen Al-Anon has a Twitter feed that works very well. We know that certain secret Facebook groups have secret Facebook groups. I mean, there's a group, forget social media, just good old email. I probably give out this email address more than any other email address I'll forward to people. There is a group in Minnesota that every Friday they send out an email of their speaker meeting the night before. One is an MP3 of the speaker's talk. But what makes them different, and the only one in the world that does this, is they also send out a video of the American Sign Language interpreter so that deaf people can get a new speaker meeting every week. And obviously that interpreter might be an AA, might not be an AA, but it doesn't matter. They're there as a professional interpreter. Has nothing to do with AA. But there's a place where video is very powerful. Especially, we have not found a way to put... you go to many conferences today and there's a sign language interpreter. But they're not videoed. A deaf member can't listen to the CD tapes in the good old days. So there's a lot of power in digital technology that obviously we can harness. We just have to be willing to do the footwork to find out how do we fit that within our traditions. How does that work? But we have groups that have secret groups. We have districts that have secret groups. We have conferences that have secret groups. We have all kinds of people who have secret groups on Facebook that are made up of AA members. And those comply with the traditions. As far as your comments on your public wall, I stay away from putting my Roman numerals up for the whole world to see. I don't need to tell the rest of the world that I'm celebrating an AA anniversary. I celebrate it so newcomers see it works. And that's why I do. And inside a secret group, if somebody wants to say congratulations on your anniversary, fine. But I don't need that to be in the outside world. Now, I know that there's lots of other recovery organizations, recovery walks, and all kinds of things that go on today. There's even like recovery fairs where sober houses and treatment centers and everybody are all gathered at a park and they all have a table. I'm not sure AA belongs there. It looks like affiliation to me. Now, if it's all kinds of people at a big probation or healthcare thing, then sure, AA should have a table and its members can be there. But social media is going to be one of those things where we're going to have to, I don't say take slow, but we just need to be judicious how we look at the traditions and how we apply them. Are we sure we want everybody to see that? And again, it's how you interpret the humility found in the 12th tradition. I interpret that meaning I don't have the ego to handle being famous for being sober. I'm sure you all know or heard last week there was a big indictment in Massachusetts of a recovery house operator that's also an AA member who had spoken at a lot of conferences, a lot of major AA meetings in the Northeast. That speaker has been indicted twice in the last, 6 months. For some horrific issues, including sexual predator-related crimes. AA does not need that kind of press. And, I wonder, I'd love to talk to him someday, because I wonder, did the ego of being famous for being sober help lead to the downfall of falling to the trappings of the old life that we used to live and what's the word the big book used? Sprees. Are those sprees created because our ego convinces us that we're different? I don't want to ever be different than a fellow member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Just because you're a lawyer who was disbarred, who got their legal license back, I don't think that makes you any different than any other member of Alcoholics Anonymous. But when you want to be on the front page of a newspaper 6 years ago telling everyone you're a member of AA and you got your license back, and then you buy a couple of recovery homes and you keep breaking your anonymity, and then that happens, my fear is, when I see a recovery home that mostly dealt with young AA members or young alcoholics and people who suffer from other problems, I think to myself, like, if you're a parent who's never known anything about AA, never dealt with anything to do with alcoholism, and you read an article about how some AA member had a recovery house and was committing sexual crimes against those newcomers, are you going to send your young son or daughter to Alcoholics Anonymous? I'm not really sure. I think you would probably be logical to say no. Why would I do that? So, anonymity goes across so many lines that I think it's something we have to really pay attention to. There is a belief out there, and I know it's out there, that the recovery community... I've been asked that question in a basket like this, and I'll pass this basket if anyone has any questions. But I pulled a question out one time, and it said, "Are you a member of the recovery community?" And I said, "No, I'm a member of a spiritual society called Alcoholics Anonymous." If that means I am a member or I'm not a member of the recovery community, that's for somebody else to figure out. But for me, AA has been just good enough. But any questions on social media, because I know it's a huge topic. Yes?
I'm Steph, I'm an alcoholic. I was going to put that question as that. How do you find these secret groups?
Okay,
Right.
I'll just repeat so people can hear it on the tape. The question is, how do you find a secret group?
Yeah.
If somebody is in one, they can invite you into one. So you can't, that's the other thing with secret groups. You can search groups on Facebook, and the closed groups will show. The secret groups will not. So you have to have somebody who's in one to invite you to one. I mean, Louisiana is part of the Southeast. If anyone thinks they would like to see what's going on in Southeast Servants, just tell me your name and I'll, invite you into Southeast Servants. Sure. Yep. Just print clearly. And you have to be friends with that person. I can only invite my friends into a secret group. I can't invite somebody I'm not friends with.
Good. I'm here in alcohol. Is there no concern on these secret groups? There's companies that specialize in data that can find those secret groups, and there's ways to get into them. Is there no concern belonging to that secret group of that data being used by headhunters or by recruiters similar to yourself?
Sure, the question...
I have a lot of concern about that.
Yeah, the question, just so everyone on the tape hears it, is there a concern about companies that collect data analytics or, especially around recruiting of personal data? My simple answer to that would be yes. However, I would follow it with this. I have a good friend who is a federal agent. He tells me that prior to Blockbuster closing, but that when it still existed, it would be very easy to find out what types of movies I used to like to rent. He also tells me it would be very easy to find out which cable channel I have on the most in my house. I think you have to judge that for yourself. I don't think anything I do today is secret. Not what channels I watch at home, not what sites I go on my computer, none of it. They used to be, people used to say, lead your life like God's following you around with a video recorder, right? Could every second of your life be exposed? And would you be okay with it? But today, that really is the truth. God doesn't need a video recorder. Pretty much everything we do, how we spend money. I mean, you could say, I go to AA conferences, a decent amount of them. Today, it is more common for me to pay with a debit card than it is cash. So if you were to look at my bank account, it would show you that I went to the Atlanta Roundup. I went to State Line. I went to the Florida State Conference. Same thing with tapes that I order. Am I in the Tape of the Month Club from Lee's Tapes? Well, what kind of people buy Lee's tapes? Well, Lee seems to specialize in AA and NA and CA conventions. So this guy, yes, obviously, prudence is important. There's no doubt about it. So, I want to talk about the third tradition a little bit. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question about anonymity. So I think a lot of what you discussed was about personal anonymity. Right? But what about AA as a whole anonymity? Like, we have an AA.org website, but what is? I mean, obviously AA has no problem with putting stuff on the internet.
Right.
Is there a line that they don't cross? Like
What they'll put up there?
Yeah. I mean,
So there's so many AA websites. Districts have websites. Areas have websites. Intergroups and central offices do. AA.org has a website. It's pretty much geared for 3 buckets of people. Those reaching out for help, professionals who refer people to AA, and AA members. You could divide our website into those 3 groups of people. What we put up there is our literature. We put up videos now. We have a YouTube channel. We put up our public service announcements. We take for granted and embrace the long form of the 11th tradition, which talks about sensational advertising. If you look at our public service announcements, we don't show cars crashing. We don't show people with their head in the toilet puking. Now, other countries do. Go on the Great Britain website if you want, and bring up their public service announcements. It's almost comical to me, because we would never do any of that.
that's for AA?
Yeah, their own. So pretty much we deal with those 3. Now, do I think we'll come to a point where we'll have anonymity protected 12-step videos? Yes. I mean, at 3 o'clock in the morning, wouldn't it be nice if you were reaching out for help that you could see an anonymity protected or listen to an anonymity protected 10-minute talk? I think we're going in that direction. Now, the countries, it's funny, when you look at the countries that have embraced digital technology the most, their in-person 12-step calls have increased the most. So digital has not prevented in-person. In fact, it is encouraged. If you want to do another one, a groundbreaking one right now is San Francisco. When you get a chance, Google San Francisco Intergroup or Central Office and go on their website. Besides calling, they have a chat feature that's instantaneous. If you have trouble with a drinking problem, you can click right there, and within seconds, an alcoholic member will respond to your communication to talk to you. So what we've seen is that those lead to more people actually finding Alcoholics Anonymous. But we stay away from controversial things. We stay away from research. But the website, let's face it, we were slow to the game. But today, it's millions of hits. And when you look at the analytics, the amount of people each month who hit, I have trouble with a drinking problem, is amazing. The majority of the hits. And, last year at the conference, when I rotated out, I did a little talk, and I talked about the state of the world when I came in 1990, and just dug up a few facts which were interesting to me. Really makes me feel old, but in 1990, there were 2.5 million payphones in the U.S. and Canada. Like, the payphone was my buddy when I got sober. Like, I came into AA before even pagers. I was here for pagers. I was here for the digital pagers that you could turn upside down and read the message as you sent numbers. I've been through all those, but 2.5 million payphones. Today in the United States and Canada, there are under 200,000. In 1990, for cable TV, the average amount of channels was 30. 30 for cable TV. In 1990, 500,000 plus complete sets of Encyclopedia Britannica were sold. Last year, you would have to order a specially made set of encyclopedias. There's no more woman or man who goes door to door in the neighborhood selling encyclopedias. But yet there's still some things that are hard copy. The General Service Office still gets 6,000 letters from inmates a year. 6,000. And they still go to, I think, is it still my, it usually is, yeah. I don't know if everybody can see my screensaver, but everyone is, if you're not familiar with it, there's a newsletter called Box 459. It's about what goes on at GSO. But that is Box 459. That's the real one. That's the one in Grand Central Station Post Office that I tell everyone they should go visit when they're in New York. Everyone goes to all these other things. Everyone wants to go to Dr. Bob's house and GSO, and if you really want to go to see where the miracle was created, go to Grand Central Station, go to Lexington Avenue, and walk uptown about 1 block to about 43rd and 45th. And you will see the Lexington Avenue Post Office Annex. And when you walk in there and turn right, you will see this old post office box that is still there, that 6,000 letters a year get delivered to. And we answer every one, we, meaning all of us, every one of those letters. However, something has happened that even somebody like me, who I think technology-wise, because of my work, I am very progressive. But something's happened that even I didn't think would happen. Prisons are embracing digital technology. It used to be you always sent soft-covered books into prisons because hard-covered books did not meet security requirements. But as those of us who have lived in a correctional facility know, books are a very good place to bring things in, to hide things. We have now a lot of correctional facilities that are embracing tablets, where inmates get a tablet on their restricted server. Federal prisons have their own radio program with different channels for different music. And so now we have inmates that have access to email. They have a very restricted way of using their email. But God knows who would have thought that. But we still get those 6,000 letters. And you know, I will tell this story now so I don't forget. Because sometimes people, we talk about the seventh tradition. We talk about putting money in the basket. We talk about how important it is for money to go to district, central office intergroup if you have one, to go to GSO. And I remember I was flying back from Asia for work, and I sat next to the chairman of the board of a very large nonprofit, just by random chance. And probably 3 hours into this flight, I realized he was the chairman of this very large nonprofit that does amazing work. But what was so interesting is that he spends 80% of his time looking for other people's money. When I told him that we don't take other people's money, he was fascinated. He was so fascinated, he had me send him one of our service manuals. That's how fascinated he was. He could not believe it. Because when I interviewed for the board, I'm on a couple of other nonprofit boards. When I interviewed for the AAWS board, was very different than other interviews I'd been to. Other interviews I go to, they want to know how many tickets my company will buy to their annual fundraising dinner, how many tables. They want to know how many foursomes I'll grab in their golf tournament. They want to know how many friends I can get from work to maybe direct a little bit of money. We don't do any of that. And sometimes, though, because AA service gets confused with the word politics, which drives me crazy, people don't realize that that money is miracle money. Like it only has one purpose, and that's to carry out miracles. The problem with AA service is the great thing about home group service is that when I meet a new person, they are usually visibly a disaster. Emotionally, spiritually, mentally, across the boat, disaster. And if they stay with me for a year and at my home group or whatever, I get to see and witness the miracle in front of me. In regular first legacy recovery, we get to see the miracle. Often, most of the time, in service, we don't. Rarely do we. I heard a story at lunchtime. But rarely do we see how our actions lead to someone else's life being saved. And that's what the seventh tradition money is about. I always tell people if they need a good story, if they run into people, because we all have our critics and people think, oh, that money is for politics or whatever. In 1983, a young Marine named Jay, who was new, got sent to a place called Beirut, to the airport actually, with a whole bunch of other Marines at a very dangerous time in the history of that country. That Marine wrote the General Service Office in July of 1983, June, because he had no literature with him. And the General Service Office wrote back to him. He was one of those letters that came into that P.O. box. And a month later, or when they got the letter, they wrote back. And they sent him a big book with a letter. And he wrote back saying thank you and wanted more literature. So they wrote back again and sent him more literature. In one of the Best of the Grapevine books, one of his letters is in there. In August of that year, he wrote back and used like Bill Wilson's terminology. He said, I have good news to report. I've started a meeting here, a group called the Peacekeepers Group. We have some Marines and some locals, and when we can meet in between the trouble and the shelling and the bombing, we have a meeting. He said, but I need more literature now, because now we have a group. So they sent him more literature through the military mail. He wrote back a month later saying everything was going great. And then they didn't hear from him for about 3 months, and in December of 83, the General Service Office got a letter from another member of that group. And that member wrote that they had the heartbreaking job of letting the lady at GSO know that Jay was one of the Marines killed in the barracks blast that killed 274 Marines in late October 1983. But they wanted GSO to know the group was still meeting. And if you were to Google AA in Lebanon today, you would see that on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturday nights at 8:30 p.m., there is a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because a young Marine named Jay had no literature. And because he wrote the office, and because groups had sent in money, they were able to send him. I know what it's like to be at the General Service Office when a man walks up to the receptionist. Who here has been to GSO? I know Randy has, few have. You get off the elevator, you see the circle and triangle, you see the Serenity Prayer in a bunch of different languages on the wall. I actually at board meetings would take the seat that I'm in now facing the elevator because I could always tell if it was somebody's first time there. Because by the time they got past the circle and triangle and saw all the Serenity Prayers, like you could see their eyes welling up. But I know what it's like to be there when a man walked right up to the receptionist and she says, "Can I help you?" And he pulls a letter out of his pocket and says, "In 1998, I was in prison in Massachusetts and I got this letter from a guy named Doug. I was trying to get sober and I wrote him a letter and he sent me back this nice letter and he sent me a big book and he said, 'Hey, if you ever get out and you're in New York, please stop by to say hello.'" And he said, "I'm stopping by to say hello." So we never know where, that's going to take us. But the seventh tradition is so underappreciated in today's Alcoholics Anonymous in a lot of places. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the long form says that every group should be self-supporting by the voluntary contributions of its members. Not everybody who goes to a meeting there, its members. And when I explain this, I kind of talk about my crazy upbringing, because for me, then it's easy to understand. So I grew up pretty blue collar, with two parents who did the best they could with very little training, and in a kind of a crazy household, where we had our own rules about how we live and who we associate with. But there were some inherent things that my parents taught me that were good. I don't say that they didn't teach me anything good. In my house, where we grow up, you don't go visit someone else without bringing something. I don't know where that started. I don't know where it came from, but it just is. And for my mother, that would mean we went to Entenmann's, which is a big budget bakery. And we were even so middle class that we would go to the Entenmann's thrift store where you get the stuff after the date is expired, right? But my mom would go over somebody else's house with something from Entenmann's. My dad would usually bring a six of Michelob or a bottle of, Irish whiskey or whatever. But it was just put in our head, that's what you do. And I think today, if someone comes to my house and they bring something, that's nice. But I don't expect them to chip in for my mortgage. And I don't expect them to pay for the food that I serve. And I don't expect them to have to clean up. They might volunteer to, but I don't expect them to. I don't expect them to vacuum the floors. I'm just thankful for their gift. Because paying for my house is my responsibility. And that's how I view AA home groups. If I go to an AA home group that's not my group, I might put $1 or $2 in the basket because I don't want to go empty-handed. I was raised that way to not go empty-handed. But I have to look, and again, if you have no money to put in the basket, we need you. But I hate that saying, we need you more than your money. I don't know where that was created, because the seventh tradition is about us needing both. Like, we don't want other people's money. So how I look at this, and I've changed my thinking about this probably 10 or 15 years ago, is I look at the amount of money I typically put in an AA basket every month. Like, how many meetings do I go to? And what do I usually put in the basket? And I want to know what that total is. Because do I want to be an egomaniac? And I want to give every group lots of money? Or do I really have to give probably 3/4 of my money to my home group? So that my home group is self-supporting by our members. I learned the early part of this. I used to belong to the West Side Young People's Group. That's where I was the GSR on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And we ran out of money. And at that time, AA Math, I was on the Young People's Committee. You could hold a dance on a Circle Line boat that went around Manhattan and easily make a couple of $1,000s in one night. Easily. $10 or $15 a head, you could make money. And I remember I told my service sponsor at the time, who was a past delegate, that we solved our money problem. That we were going to hold a dance on the Circle Line. And we were going to get the best AA DJ in New York. And everybody from the counties and Rockland and Connecticut, and everybody was going to come. And he told me, your group needs to end. God is speaking through your group conscience. You're not self-supporting through the voluntary contributions of your own members. And that was pretty harsh, I thought. But he was right. That we don't need to hold events so that other groups can support us. You know, one of the most misused phrases in Alcoholics Anonymous is a resentment in a coffee pot. What that has created is a fellowship of so many meetings and not enough home groups. You know, when I hear somebody say in a meeting, so-and-so meeting needs support, I'm like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that they can't be self-supporting? Well, then maybe they should think about finding a way to become self-supporting or disband. But that each group should be voluntarily self-supporting. And I'm not sure we've become a put $1 or $2 in the basket. And the seventh tradition is one of the backbones of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, we have challenges here digitally. I now have gone to certain meetings where they announce the treasurer will be in the kitchen. And the treasurer has a square on their phone. And they take contributions that way. They take contributions. I have seen other AA groups that have PayPal accounts. Now, I know it would be easy for someone like me, because I'm so judgmental, to say, come on, you can carry cash. And I would love to say that. Now, I know myself. I carry cash, but I know why I carry it. I'm in like 4 different cities every week for work. I keep an emergency credit card paperclip to my passport in my briefcase in case I would have happened to lose my wallet. But I am deathly afraid of being stuck somewhere where, like, I have no ID, no credit cards. So, like, I know that I carry enough cash that I can get a hotel room and take care of myself. But the truth is, the young kids in my office, and when I say young, I mean between like 22 and 30, it's amazing. I was out to lunch with them about a month ago. I took a couple of them out, and they had just went to a Braves game all together, and 3 of them actually lived together. And they're Venmoing each other the money. I didn't even know what Venmo was, right? But now I have Venmo, right? Because I find out that somebody can buy the tickets and the other people can pay them back right there, instantaneously. And that instead of like where I grew up, where I had to leave cash or a check for my part of the cable and my part of the electric and my part of the rent, they Venmo to each other. They hardly carry cash. And so I think I appreciate how spiritual the basket is, and I hope that there's always a basket going around. But I also know how childish it would be for us to say we're not going to find a way to let members contribute. There has to be some middle ground there so that groups can be self-supporting. And I think, you know, those times are changing. And obviously, there's affiliation issues, but if you apply the traditions, there are ways to do that. I look at the International Convention in Atlanta and compare it to the International Convention in San Antonio. In Atlanta, first of all, 80-something, I want to say 5% of the people who went to Atlanta pre-registered. Meaning they paid for their registration a month prior to the convention. Over 95% of the people who paid for that convention paid via some type of digital payment on our registration link. They did not send a check in. 95%. We had a little question there. Would you like a Grapevine subscription? And 1,000 people paid right there that they wanted a Grapevine subscription. So again, I'm one of these people who believes you can apply the traditions in today's world if you take the proper time and look at all the unintended consequences. But we can't just belong to the Flat Earth Society. The big book says, more will be revealed. But yet sometimes we act like anything after 1939 is criminal, right? Like, can't watch TV. Bill definitely didn't have a TV. So no TV, right? And it says, so I think we have to find a way. But the seventh tradition in today's AA is super important. And I love groups that on anniversary nights make it a point of letting the guests know that we don't want their money. We are a group of people that has wanted our family's money forever. No group of people has wanted their family's money more than us. And I think it sends such a loud message to the visitors to Alcoholics Anonymous at like an open anniversary meeting when we actually tell them, while we appreciate your thought that you would like to put money in our basket, we only take money from AA members. I think that's the thing that really separates us from a lot of other organizations. I do want to talk about the opiate epidemic. And people say, well, isn't that an outside issue? And I say, well, it might have been, but not if it's mentioned in over 50% of the AA meetings I go to today. And I say this because this is my view as a man who got sober young, who tends to sponsor young guys. If you're an alcoholic, I don't care what other problem you have. If you have a desire to stop drink and a drinking problem, sit in the AA meeting closed as long as you want to decide you're an alcoholic. That's your business. If you want to go to an open meeting, be my guest. But one of the things that the recovery world has kind of seeped into AA is this belief that if I have gone through the big book and have the solution found in steps 2 to 12, I can help anybody. That the first step doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your problem is. I have the solution. And the truth is, and social media has helped me here, is I am tired, really tired, of seeing rest in peace posts on Facebook of young men and women that have overdosed that I know from Alcoholics Anonymous. I am tired of people who are not alcoholic ODing in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Again, if you're an alcoholic and a drug addict, welcome. Welcome, and it's clear that our program has worked. I have some sponsees that go to NA or Drug Addicts, DAA, Drug Addicts Anonymous, or CA and AA. But I am talking about the people I meet who tell me they really never drank. That their drug of choice is not alcohol. I am tired of seeing those people die. And I think members of AA have contributed to this, and I'm not afraid to talk about it. When somebody says NA sucks in an AA meeting, or that other fellowship doesn't have solution, what they're doing is putting in the head of somebody that the place that could save their life might not be okay. We do not need to be putting down other 12-step groups in Alcoholics Anonymous. In fact, I think if we want to lead what the big book tells us of being of service to God and those about us, which is our primary aim, then I need to do a couple of things. And I can tell you what it looks like for me. And since I moved 3 years ago and I've run into this more than I ever had, number one, I keep other fellowship meeting directories in my car. Always. Now, my home group, we also let people know, we don't put them out on our literature table, but we let people know that we do have information for other fellowship meetings. Should you want it, please see the secretary. I also have made it a point to meet, like we're all here together, let's face it. It's Saturday afternoon in Lafayette, Louisiana. Everybody in this room is pretty much committed to Alcoholics Anonymous, and you choose to be here on a Saturday afternoon. The truth is, there's a lot of people in other fellowships who are just as committed to their fellowship as we are to AA. And I had to make it a mission of mine to find other men and women in those fellowships who do the deal like I do in AA. Because when I meet somebody who only suffers from that problem, I want to personally hand them over to somebody in that fellowship who takes AA, who takes NA or CA or DAA as seriously as I take AA. We simply can't say the problem hasn't been these other fellowships. It's us. It's our own members. I mean, I once got a question in an Ask It basket that somebody got very mad at me for at GSO, but I didn't put the question in there. So don't ask me to answer questions if you're going to be mad at what I answer, right? But the question was, are drug addicts going to kill Alcoholics Anonymous? And I said, of course not. But heavy drinkers might. And, somebody said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, we're not a program to stop drunk driving. We're not a program to stop campus crime. We're not a program to end domestic violence. All those things might get impacted by when our members stop drinking, but we're not a program for heavy drinking. We're a program for people who suffer from the disease that is laid out in the Big Book, specifically in the doctor's opinion and more about alcoholism. We are a program. I've never been addicted to alcohol. I'm a person whose story is I never even crossed the line. I don't even know where that line is. I never saw it. Once I had a drink, I need to keep drinking. That's my story. It's what's exactly described in the doctor's opinion. But that's who AA works for. But there are other people who have different stories, and I just think we need to be clear about who we're trying to help. We can't be all things to all people. This pamphlet, if anybody here has ever written a letter to GSO, you know how frustrating that can be, because sometimes you read it and then you read it again and you're like, this doesn't say anything. But this pamphlet gives yes and no answers. Can a non-alcoholic pill or drug addict become an AA member? No. Can such a person be brought as a visitor to an open AA meeting for help and inspiration? Yes. If so, should these non-alcoholic pill or drug users be led to believe that they have become AA members? No. And question number 4, which is what I already talked about. Can a pill or drug taker who has a genuine alcoholic history become a member of AA? Yes. Because the other problems don't matter. They just simply don't matter. But our third tradition has been so, the last 20 years, I'm saying that I care more about saving people's lives than my ego of building an army of sponsees, because I tell the person, because identification is key. I've talked to enough of these young kids who have left. They tell me, I just didn't identify with alcoholics. I didn't have blackouts. I don't know what it's like to drive with one hand over your eye. You know, like there's identification. Identification is key. Now, the other tradition I wanted to make sure I talked about in today's world, just a little warning. As soon as anyone brings up autonomy, get ready. Because you're probably going to hear something that is nothing to do with our literature. The fourth tradition was never meant to be a veto over any of the other 11. In fact, it has nothing to do with the other 11 traditions. In Traditions Illustrated, I love that they use the C word, custom. Customs are very different than traditions. For those that have ever go to New York City, go to the Atlantic Group. I think we have some Atlantic Group members. They have great cake, they will tell you. Excellent. Excellent cake, whatever they say. Their excellent cake is a great custom, but not a tradition. They tell people how to dress who speak there. That's awesome, because that's their custom. I get to choose whether I want to go along with that custom. If I don't want to go along with it, I don't speak there, right? There are lots of customs in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's what the fourth tradition was made for. Customs. Groups have the authority to play with customs. Some groups like cupcakes. Some groups like sheet cakes. Some groups like to read how it works. Some groups hate how it works. Some groups like to read the Lord's Prayer. Some groups hate the Lord's Prayer. Some groups like the promises. There are groups in North Carolina called FTL groups. Anybody ever heard one of them? I can't say the first word. But it's blank the lamination. They don't like laminated how it works or steps or traditions. They think it should be read out of the book so that the newcomer sees where it comes from. Well, FTL, great custom, not a tradition. And my point is, customs make and embrace the individual character of every AA group. And it is awesome. And I've had to learn to celebrate the differences rather than pick on the differences, which goes against my nature as a bully. Like, I have to celebrate your customs. But when people start playing around with other traditions and saying that the fourth tradition gives us the right to make non-alcoholics members, or when a church, we pay rent in churches or clubhouses or buildings. We pay rent. When the church comes and says, we think you should help us roof the building, we don't do that. We're not affiliated. If you need to charge us $20 more a month rent because you're putting a new roof on, or your snowplow bill this winter was heavy, well, then we want to be self-supporting. But the fourth tradition was never meant to apply to the other 11. And if you read about it in here or in AA Comes of Age, you will see that. There's a question here, what is AA World Service? So I will just explain this very briefly. And actually I have a pen so I could draw you a picture, because most people visual is easier. The General Service Board is 21 trustees. I don't know how many people know that or don't know that. These people right here, 14 alcoholic and 7 non-alcoholic. I'm sure some of you must know Don Massey, right? He's always fond of talking about, when he was a trustee, his 121st. I used to talk about that because I loved when he talked about it. When I was a trustee, I owned 121st for 4 years of everything Alcoholics Anonymous has, legally. Not spiritually, but legally. These 21 people own a corporation called the General Service Board of AA, Inc. Some people, because the service manual was not really made clear in my opinion, it's a footnote. The 21 trustees, those 21 people, really own 3 companies. They own this one, the General Service Board, Inc. They own the AA Grapevine, and they own AA World Services. Some people think the General Service Board owns AA Grapevine and AAWS. As an entity, that's incorrect. The 21 trustees own the General Service Board, Inc., own AA Grapevine, Inc., and own AAWS. So, these 21 people, during their term, own 1/21st of each of these. When you become a trustee, you sign paperwork. Inside that paperwork is no conflicts of interest. And also, once you cease being a trustee, you lose your 1/21st. While you're a trustee, the bylaws are very clear. You can't sell your 1/21st. You can't assign it to somebody. You can't do any alcoholic thinking you could think about with your 1/21st. You simply own 1/21st. And I'll stress this because it is so important that groups be connected to their area, because we need good delegates. That's a lot of power that you're giving 21 people. We know how many AA members are in the United States and Canada. And 21 of them own these 3 corporations. The reserve fund, give or take, let's just call it 11 million. The AA Grapevine, AAWS, inside that pension fund alone, $50 million for the employees. Annual budget here of $14 million a year. Annual budget here of about $3.5 million. That's a pretty big legal operation that 21 people own all of. So it is imperative, and this is why they're at the bottom of the triangle. And the groups are at the top. And the board is down here. And then in here you have assemblies and districts. But if districts and areas are not doing their job, the board runs unchecked. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. That saying's been around a long time. I love when delegates held the board accountable. In fact, I think the harder the questions, the more transparent you look. But I work running a large publicly traded company, so for me, businesses should be ethical, honest, accountable, and transparent. Have to be. So AA World Service is this company right over here. And underneath AA World Service, you basically have the General Service Office that provides our services. And you have AA Publishing that prints our literature. So what is AAWS? It's GSO and our publishing operation. The biggest part of the General Service Board from a money point of view, for sure, and from a service point of view. And each of these, just for any geeks that are in here, the General Service Board only meets 4 times a year, and all 21 members are directors on the General Service Board. So everybody here gets a vote at the General Service Board. But not for AAWS and the Grapevine. These boards are only 9 people each. And only 4 trustees are on each board. The others are made up of employees or non-trustee directors. So I was a director on AAWS for 4 years, but I was not a trustee. And those directors are brought on for their professional or business expertise. When I became a trustee, I was both. I was on this board, and I was on the AAWS board. But the easiest way to think about what is AAWS is that it's our publishing operation and our service operation. It's basically everything we do except the AA Grapevine. The AA Grapevine has its own board of directors and is responsible for printing the AA meeting and print and the books that they publish.
So if I give a contribution, it goes to AA World Service.
Great question. That's an awesome question. First of all, let me just only contributions go to the General Service Board. AAWS does not accept contributions. Neither does the AA Grapevine. All contributions go to the General Service Board. Now, if you buy literature, you make that check out to AA World Services. Now, what happens to that contribution money? Which, you know, a lot of people, I mean, it's very hard to understand how things work at GSO sometimes because it's so confusing. But basically what happens is you send your money to the General Service Board, and then once a year they transfer that money to AAWS because AAWS is carrying out the work through GSO. And we don't accept donations. We like the contribution word, not the donation word. Yes?
Hi, I have a question. It was my understanding that the General Service, I may have this wrong, that's why I'm asking. Is the General Service Board the one that moved with the legal suit and used a bunch of money to pay lawyers to sue somebody?
Well, we could do a whole workshop on that question.
It's a good question.
But technically, not true.
Because when you said that these people aren't doing their job,
Right.
then this power will corrupt. But I'm wondering where's the checkpoint? Because if we're all doing our job, but they have complete control and can take actions without permission, then how can they possibly not end up corrupting if we have no way to
Understood.
checkpoint?
So I would tell you this, just so you understand the flow. So if you get involved talking to someone who thinks opposite than you, I just want to make sure you're armed with the right information.
Yeah, I'm just
Yep.
asking. Curious.
AWS wanted to file a lawsuit. The idea came from AAWS. Okay? They had a vote, and that vote passed 8-1 to file a lawsuit on the manuscript.
Is it the trustees of AAWS
No.
or the board of
AAWS,
But you
their
were a
board.
double, right?
What?
You were a trustee and an AAWS,
Right.
right? So that does occur. How many of those 8 people were
Four.
trustees?
4 of them are trustees.
Okay, I was just wondering.
However, it's just follow me here.
Okay.
Because it impacted a major policy, which is one of our warranties, right? In Concept 12, we talk about lawsuits. AAWS did not file it.
Okay.
They took it to the General Service Board. The General Service Board had a meeting via conference call where AAWS told the General Service Board, we want to file this lawsuit, but we want your blessing. The General Service Board approved that. They were 1 trustee short because of a death, 20-0. So the General Service Board approved. The lawsuit is in AAWS's name. The General Service Board approved filing it. So AAWS wanted to file it. They had the legal authority to file it. But they did go to the General Service Board to ask. Now, I think the system worked. Even though anybody who knows me knows this lawsuit was completely insane and went against everything we should ever do. But they dropped it. They dropped it in February after hearing so much uproar from the fellowship. And if you read the minutes of the trustees conference committee at this year's conference, do you go to area meetings?
No, but I go to district.
Okay.
And there was a lot shared there about stuff.
So what you want exactly, because I will imagine someone might not want you to have it, okay? This is what you want exactly. From the trustees conference committee, you want their additional considerations.
Howard Delegate was on that committee too.
Yeah, your delegate was on that committee. Inside those additional considerations, the committee was very clear about the lawsuit, about getting wider input the next time. Maybe the board should have went to the conference instead of just blessing AAWS. But I would read them. But I'm glad that it ended. But I would say I don't think most people realize the power that those 21 people have. And it's supposed to be the conference charter, that spiritual agreement that I accept the groups of my boss, speaking through the delegates. Brandon?
That's why I keep preaching to people how important it is for the people that can put in positions like that to hold New York accountable for what goes on, the trustees accountable, to be willing to speak up when they think it's a problem, rather than you go up there and think, well, I have a spiritual awakening, I better know. When we go up there as a delegate, we go up there to do the work with Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole, not up there for ourselves. But it's important that we have people that will try. If they don't understand something, ask. And ask for more if you still don't understand.
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot of trappings around being delegate that are easy to fall into. You're one of 93 people out of all of AA going for the 1-week conference, right? And basically you get your ass kissed for a week, right? And the staff treat you like you're like in the College of Cardinals, right? But there's some trappings there, and unfortunately, people who ask hard questions, sometimes they're branded like not being okay simply because they dare to ask a hard question. We have to be asking the people. I'll tell you a little story. I interviewed to be a director 4 times. I was rejected 3. I made it to the interview stage, And each time I left that interview, I thought I knocked it out of the park because of my crazy ego, right? And each time I got the letter, thanks for coming, we chose someone else. My fourth interview was September 2008. In my work life, the week before Lehman Brothers had just closed its doors, AIG was getting ready to collapse, the subprime mortgage business was done, and the economics of the world were in bad shape. When I went to that interview, which was at a hotel, and 5 members of the nominating committee were there, usually the way those interviews go is each kind of person has their own pet peeve in AA. You got the singleness of purpose lunatic, you have the seventh tradition lunatic, you have the, I hate literature prophet person. Everybody has their bent, right? And they fire questions at you for an hour, and you answer. At this particular interview, which was my fourth one, the first question out of the bat from somebody who passed away now was, have you looked at our recent financials, and is there anything there that concerns you? And I looked right at him and said, yes and yes. And he said, what concerns you? And I said, your unfunded pension liability is an out-of-control freight train. And if you do not get a hold of it, the General Service Board in 20 or 30 years will have big questions to answer because you probably will be near economic collapse. And it might not even take 20 or 30 years. For the rest of that hour, we never left the topic of pensions and pension liabilities and unfunded liabilities and retirement programs, things that I was very familiar with in my work life. When I left that interview, I thought I blew it. Totally different than my first 3, where I thought I was the best. I was like, well, that sucked. And I basically just told them they're running us into the ground. And what the hell have they been doing? They better get their heads out of their ass. Like, that's basically, if I was on the other table, it would have sounded like that to me. And I got chosen. And I can tell you that within about, I don't know, that was 2009. By the time I started serving, it was 10. By 2013, we had ended the old retirement program and created a new one that made more sense. We were able to transfer some money out of the reserve fund to the pension program. We were able to start paying more money each year towards our pension. And so I'm all for people asking hard questions, but I can tell you it's not easy to. And that's why I love Randy's point. We need delegates who are willing to hold people accountable. I'm not talking about conspiracy theories. We don't need to serve if there was a second shooter on the grassy knoll at JFK, right? We don't need to solve that problem. I'm just saying we need people who hold people accountable.
I have one more question, and I just want to clarify. I don't have enough information about all of the ins and outs to even have an opinion about the lawsuit. I have feelings, but not a clear opinion. But my concern was that we keep talking about delegates. What I understood is that this decision was made with no approval from delegates. So that's kind of more my question. Like, in the future, as AA stands now.
But that's why I'm saying you have to read what you haven't read.
Okay.
Because inside that additional consideration, the trustees committee says the next time, if they choose to sue somebody, they should consult with the conference.
So they kind of amended their future decisions or power.
That's their bosses, the delegates who are saying that, not them.
So there isn't a checkpoint, basically. Like, at this point, the only checkpoint is a spiritual agreement.
The delegates are not the board.
I know. That's
Okay.
what I'm saying. Is the board technically doesn't have...
The board legally has unlimited power.
That's what I was asking. Okay.
But spiritually, the conference could unelect the board. That's their power. They could unelect some of the trustees.
Okay.
But the conference really took back control this year by publishing those additional considerations. I mean, I agree. I think they went outside the bounds. You need to write a decision. I shouldn't have to check with 93 people to pay the rent at GSO, right? I think a reasonable person knows that. But if I want to start a public lawsuit, I should have checked with the conference delegates.
Okay.
I was not part of starting it, so I wasn't there. I've been a very vocal person as to why they should end it, and I'm glad they did. So there's a question here, how you feel about calendars that are turned into professional boards with the sponsor's full name and signed telephone number. I don't know what that means.
Are you talking about meeting slips? I didn't write it, but there's meeting slips
I don't know.
that are counted.
Meeting slips that go to professional boards.
Yeah.
Oh.
There, and I'm thinking anonymity here.
Oh, gotcha. So what you're asking is,
John given a professional board someone else's name and number,
understood.
and if that person ever maybe applied with that board for a professional license, would they be penalized?
Yeah, so here's what I would say. This is like meeting slips, but to a more serious, because you have a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer or somebody, and it's going to, usually these states have professional boards that deal with their people who are like us. What I don't like is rubber stamps that groups use to stamp meeting slips, because I don't think groups should certify attendance. I don't want the primary purpose group saying that this person was there. I think it's an individual AA member's choice to sign or not. But if you do sign, you have entered the criminal justice system, or you have entered that administrative system that somebody might actually track you down and say, were they really there? I mean, you do give up some of your individual freedom. So I think it's a personal choice. There's a lot, when we deal with the government, it's like corrections meetings. In most states, you can't become overly familiar with an inmate, or you lose your status as a volunteer. Like, you can't be their friend. You're an AA volunteer, well, that's it. In some states, if you're a corrections volunteer, you become a mandatory reporter. We just had this situation in Georgia. So in Georgia, teachers in public schools who hold a license are mandatory reporters when it comes to child abuse. And not just on duty. They are mandatory reporters that if they witness or suspect child abuse, they have a responsibility to report it. In a meeting in Georgia recently, last year, a woman came in who had been in and out many times, and she reported in that meeting, for the whole meeting to share here, that she and her 17-year-old son had a big party on Saturday night, and that she had inappropriate relations with a 16-year-old boy. There was a public school teacher who was licensed in that meeting. That public school teacher reported that to the authorities. That AA member was arrested for statutory rape and charged. I personally do not blame that teacher. I blame stupidity on sharing. Like knowing what to share in a meeting and not to. I am not going to deny a teacher who fought hard to keep their license and stay sober. You don't have a right to tell somebody in front of them that you did a crime to a child. They are a mandatory reporter. Same thing happens with corrections volunteers, which is why hearing fifth steps is tricky in correctional settings. If you are a corrections volunteer, I don't have my card on me, it's in my glove compartment, but I had to go to an orientation program. I had to sign an agreement with the state that I would uphold certain rules that they have for volunteers. One of those is that if if an inmate told me that another inmate or a worker sexually assaulted them, I have a duty to report it. They give that requirement to all volunteers, not just AA volunteers. So hence, I don't hear fifth steps for any of those inmates. I don't want to be in that situation. But there are many places where we intersect with the government, but it's a personal choice. I don't have to be an AA volunteer. You don't have to sign a slip for someone who's at a professional agency, but once you do, if you have to put your last name on there, if that person might not be being honest with whoever they're reporting to, and they want to check on them, they may go to you and ask. So, at that point, you step out of being an AA member, and you become yourself as a citizen, and you're certifying that that person was at a meeting. Now, most judges, I will tell you, in all of these things that have made it to court, judges are always very kind, it seems, to AA members who are like witnesses. They block out their name. They don't let it be put in the court documents. They seal their last name. There was a murder in New York about 20 years ago where a lot of people in an AA meeting got called as witnesses. The judge would not let them be on TV. The judge struck their last name from the public record. So there are ways to weave through these things, but they do get complicated. Who else has a question? These things, life is complicated. It for sure is. I was very worried when they filed the lawsuit because I was the past chair of AA World Services. I had interactions regarding that manuscript, and I wanted to know what they were doing to protect my anonymity. Like, I got called by the other side's lawyer who told me he was going to subpoena me. And I was not too excited about that, right? So I really wanted to know, did the board think about that when they made the decision that some of our names would be out there? But there's a lot of unintended consequences around those things. And let's face it, safety has opened up the issues around safety in AA meetings and things that have happened all come from a lack of understanding of the traditions. I wish that we're changing some of our literature now. I think that'll help. But when a newcomer comes to their sponsor or somebody in a meeting and says, so-and-so gave me a ride home the other night and this happened. We know that certain AA members have told other members, well, you can't go call the police because that'll break their anonymity. Well, that's crazy town. That's not even remotely correct. And now we're changing our literature so that it's very clear. People can't use a spiritual principle to commit crimes. That's insanity. And we don't investigate crimes. If somebody comes to me as an AA member that they've been a victim of a crime, my job is to drive them to the police station and help them go through reporting it. But we've kind of created our own code of silence, by what some people have said. That is not true. Anonymity is not a defense against committing criminal actions. And people say, can you be kicked out of AA? Well, no. But that's the great thing. You can also be standing inside of that parking lot, right outside this building, and you could be kicked out of every AA meeting in the world, but you still have your AA membership card. We can't take your AA membership from you. You get to hold that in your pocket as long as you want. But that doesn't mean you get to be a jerk in the meeting. Like, other people's sobriety is more important than you acting like a jerk. And so, these issues of safety have become important because, again, it goes back to our reputation. We don't want people thinking. And on the other hand, we want people to come into AA. I'm a convicted criminal. I want to know that I get to come in here and I can be a member amongst members. But there's been changes the last 10 years specifically that have impacted a lot of our traditions. I'll give you an example. So, we just had a school shooting in Texas this week. We know of the school shooting in Columbine. We know of the one in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. That has nothing to do with AA, but what it does has to do with is it's changed regulations, state and locally, around a lot of schools, including preschools. There are a lot of AA groups that meet in buildings like this who fall subject to those rules, especially what we've noticed in AA with churches and synagogues, preschools. There are a lot of preschools that meet in churches. A lot of those preschools have become subject to some of these new rules. One of those rules is closed circuit surveillance, video cameras. In many jurisdictions now, schools have to have video cameras showing who goes in and who goes out, some showing that room. Well, there was a group, I won't say where it's from, but there was a burglary in that church. The local police did what they're supposed to, which is look at the video. The good news was it was not somebody from the AA group, right? That's the good news. The bad news was when the police were reviewing the videotape, they saw a registered sex offender attending the AA meeting. But to them, they didn't care it was the AA meeting. It's just that they were in a building that a preschool is in, which is against that state law. And they picked that person up. So I think in today's world, we're going to have to be more, like Randy talked about, like when we leave digital footprints with Facebook and everything. We also live in a world today where when we go to a meeting, we have to expect that in certain buildings, there will be videotape documentation of me going to that AA meeting. So I was fascinated by this, and I was in this area for work, so I visited this group just because I wanted to see. And what I found was interesting. So you know those wet floor signs, the yellow ones that kind of are like a V? They had two of them outside their doors that had the Ghostbusters red circle with a line through it with a video camera. And at the start of their meeting, they read in their script, we want all members of AA to know that this building to comply with local law because of school that is held here, there is videotaped record of many of the people who come and go in our rooms. If you are uncomfortable with that, we respect it, but we would ask you, then you should leave, because in order for us to meet here, we have to comply with that. So I think there are lots of, we have group conscience in Georgia all the time about guns. Certain AA groups where they'll say, we don't want guns in this meeting, and it's a total debacle, of course, about group conscience, this is AA, it just becomes, but that's why I think the traditions have to be looked at carefully, because everything we do in the outside world impacts somehow Alcoholics Anonymous, We just don't think about it until there's a problem. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll see you tonight. And I really thank you. And again, I want to say what I said in the beginning. The best thing you can do is take somebody through the traditions after they're done going through the big book. And share our spiritual principles with them so that they start to understand them. That's how critical these are. Thanks.
Thank you.